can you hurry up and find the keys? I want to get out of here before another nutcase wanders by.
Man or bear?
Eseth, another crazy religious person. Get the mace.
Where? Oh, no, Auntie, that's just Steve Shives.
Eseth, another crazy religious person. Get the mace.
The question that is sweeping the internet as I'm writing this and will probably be all but forgotten by the time I post this, but hey, let me take a shot anyway.
Boy, if you think you're late, just wait until you see this video.
Auntie, he has us blocked.
So he's not gonna see our video. Motherfucker.
In the unlikely event that you don't know what I mean by man or bear discourse, it's basically this. A TikToker, Screenshot HQ, posted a video featuring women who were asked this question. Would you rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear?
Would you rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear?
Probably a bear.
Probably a man.
A bear.
A man.
A bear. Bear.
A bear.
With a bear.
So maybe a bear.
Definitely a man. Is he hot? A man. Well, yeah, obviously.
A man. Depends what man, but probably a bear.
Oh, 100% a bear, which is like terrifying to say, but
Definitely a bear.
a bear.
I would say a man.
Probably a bear.
Wait. Show me this again. Graffiti, high buildings and graffiti. Graffiti, high buildings. Graffiti, high buildings. Also seems like these windows are gated. Shopping window with a mini graffiti. Graffiti, gated windows. Graffiti. Shopping window. Graffiti. Oh, look at that. There is a tree. And even more graffiti. Yeah, that's definitely an urban area. A very urban area. Why am I pointing this out? Well, because your sense of fear is skewed to what you're exposed to most, or more at least. Or to say it differently, if you want people to tell you that they'd rather eat snails than cinnamon, you'd probably be better off asking in France than in rural Alberta.
Of the 8 women shown in the video, 7 chose the bear.
Either you saw a different version than I did, or you're really bad at counting, but in either case, I think we can agree, many women chose the bear.
The video went viral and sparked a larger conversation in which women shared their experiences and attempted to provide men with some insight into why so many of them would choose the bear.
Is it too early for me to provide insight as to why women would choose the bear? I mean, I'd hate to blow my load too soon and leave everyone unsatisfied, but it is the central topic of the video, probably better just to state my position up front. The women choosing the bear aren't choosing the bear. They're professing choice in the bear, but they're not actually faced with that decision. What we're witnessing is a social performance. They're expressing their hatred of men because it's advantageous for them to do so. Or at least, they think it's advantageous for them to do so. They're trying to leverage their fear and men's guilt into better treatment from men. They might not even realize they're doing that. This might be a strategy they've subconsciously picked up on because they're immersed in a culture that uses this very strategy against many kinds of groups. But if they were plopped in the middle of the woods next to 2 cages, one of which contained an 800-pound killing machine, and the other contained Tim from accounting, and they had to choose to open one of the cages, they're not opening the cage with the bear.
Are they though? I mean, I agree that we have a culture that gives you brownie points for disparaging some groups of people and gets you fired if not jailed if you're disparaging others, especially in England. But I don't think that it is a good idea to assign intent to people whose thoughts we cannot know. Did they want to get brownie points? Maybe. Did they hate men? Maybe. Some certainly do. They said as much.
Because I detest men.
Or at least that they fear men.
Because I'm scared of men.
But others didn't.
Probably a man.
And then there is this little part here.
What if the bear tries to kill me?
Where she clearly retorts to the interviewer, who very likely asked her, what if the man she met was trying to kill her? Which makes me wonder how neutral the questioner was in the first place. And this one says nothing about men at all. In fact, she even clarifies it.
It doesn't have to do anything with like men essentially. I just really like bears.
She explicitly says that she just really likes bears. And then there is this gem.
I mean, I feel like I could let the bear calm down, you know? Whereas I don't know what the man's gonna do, so.
Who, based on what she says, seems to be thinking about a wrestling match rather than a random encounter, and is clearly oblivious to the capabilities of an actual bear. Like, for example, the one that was strolling around my former school trip a while ago. And yes, before you ask, the deer is still alive. You're not hallucinating. Some city people, I swear. Seriously, it reminds me of the time when some tourist showed up with a piece of dried cow shit and asked if these things were under natural protection or if they could keep it and bring it home as a souvenir. Or the other time where that one woman told her kid that a wooden figurine isn't carved but poured into molds. Either way, no idea what that bear woman there was thinking. Maybe she was fighting Winnie the Pooh in her head. We do not know. We cannot know. And that is exactly my point.
Damn it, Eseth, how come you start off every video by disagreeing with me? Is it really so hard just to acknowledge that I'm right about everything? But, granted, I can't see into the black box of these women's minds, so understanding their true motivations is forever going to be clouded by a layer of separation. Now, like the women in the video, I'm also from the city. When I'm walking about, I'm primed to be on the lookout for attacks from people and not attacks from bears. Yet I still recognize that per capita, bears are way more dangerous than people. There just aren't that many bears about. Now that is the conclusion that I think even a city slicker should reach if they aren't profoundly stupid. And I don't think the women are that stupid. I think something else is going on, and the potentially subconscious social manipulation angle is what I find to be most likely. Except in the case of the woman who said she just really likes bears. I think she might actually just be stupid. But, round 2 for the Bog of Suffering. Audience, comment whether you think Eseth or I are being more reasonable in our assessments. I know you're all going to pick Eseth. You did last time. You pack of traitors.
And men got indignant and defensive and self-righteous and...
Oh, come on, Stevie. If they'd called your lover worse than a feral bear, you'd have gotten pissy too. Albeit for a slightly different reason.
provided women with a reminder of why they chose the bear.
They basically called men worse than wild animals. Now, if you prod a wild animal, it's not going to get indignant or defensive or self-righteous. It's going to kill and eat you. Hopefully in that order. Now, I know this because I'm not retarded. I also don't think the women are retarded. I think the women are taking the social role of victim. You, however, are agreeing with the women and are not playing the social role of victim, so you are either retarded, or you are playing a different social role, the social role of white knight. Now, I did say either or, but I've been aware of you long enough to know that that's not true.
If this conversation feels familiar to you, be you man, woman, or NB.
NB? Dude, don't shove in random unrelated virtue signaling. This is a man versus women's path and not a reality versus fiction one.
That's probably because we have some variation of it every few years. The last big one that we had was, I think, during the height of the Me Too movement in 2017, though there have been smaller, more localized versions of Me Too since then. Compared to Me Too, Man or Bear feels lighter, because it's centered around a hypothetical question, whereas Me Too was about exposing and imposing consequences for real offenses committed by and against real people.
Real consequences, yes. Real offenses, sometimes.
But Man or Bear isn't just for fun.
I agree it's not for fun. It's hatred being used to grab social power. I can hardly think of something less fun at the moment.
That hypothetical question refers to the actual lived experiences of women.
Unless you mean to propose that part of the lived experience of being a woman is surviving bear encounters at a higher rate than surviving encounters with men, then no, it doesn't.
If you are a woman, chances are you've had at least one experience where a man has made you feel uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There was this one time where I accidentally headed for the baby changing table and I ended up in the men's room rather than in the women's room, thinking I went for the women's room because I figured that's the only place where you would have these things in the first place. And then a guy suddenly came in because, he had to pee. And I only then noticed the urinals on the other side, and it felt so uncomfortable. I was the whole time just looking down, trying to focus only on the diapers, trying to be quick, but man, imagine having a shy bladder or something and you go to the urinals and there is not just a guy in the bathroom, but a woman with a hyper-curious baby that just stares at you with those laser-pointed eyes. That's gotta be the Dark Souls of toilet visits if ever I saw one.
Or threatened.
Made them feel threatened, not actually threatened them. There is a big difference there, Stevie. Feelings are not reality.
Or done something even worse.
That's almost certainly true, but let's note that you've set the bar as low as at least one instance of being made uncomfortable. This is true for me in regards to women. And men, for that matter. You are describing what is a normal human experience. And then you're taking this normal human experience and framing it as something that uniquely negatively affects women.
If you are a man, chances are you know a woman who has had such experiences, whether they've told you about it or not.
I find it interesting how the sentiment has slowly warped from listen and believe to assume and believe. Assuming almost seems like the opposite of listening, but I guess what's really important is that we fast-track people to the belief, because that's ultimately the only thing that matters.
Chances are also good, if you are a man, that, intentionally or not, you have made a woman feel uncomfortable or threatened.
And chances are also good if you're an MP. Just kidding. Not even Stevie cares about those for longer than one virtue signal.
It's not a pleasant realization, but insight isn't always fun.
I am cuddly and lovable, and have threatened no one, man or woman. If someone feels threatened around me, that's describing something about them, not me, and I am not in control of other people's feelings. Introspection is a fair enough recommendation to give to anyone. Do you think the women choosing bear might benefit from some?
Anyway, the man or bear discourse did remind me of Me Too, but it also felt familiar for another reason. I'm an atheist, and if you go back and watch some of my older videos, you'll see that I used to talk about atheism-related topics quite a lot.
Ah, the past. You know, I wasn't doing anything in terms of content creation in the 2000s or early 2010s, but that really seems like that was the time it was most fun to be a content creator. Like, everyone was small, everyone argued back and forth with each other rather than existing in these, like, isolated segments of YouTube. People had yet to go crazy and weren't raving lunatics or end-of-days prophets, not calling out anyone in particular. And it was during this time that I used to watch Steve quite regularly. Since he invited us to go back and look at his old content, here's a clip from An Atheist Reads Ray Comfort, one of my favorite series he ever did.
Ray responds that he doesn't like being called religious. He says that calling a Christian religious is like calling an African American person a nigger. Now, I should note that Ray doesn't say nigger in the book. He says N-word. I said nigger because that's the word that people are talking about when they say the N-word. And I figure if you're going to talk about the word, you should at least be enough of a grown-up to pronounce the fucking thing. Anyway.
Ah, how I miss the past. Don't you, Steve?
I was a very minor participant in the atheist movement that sprang up in the mid-2000s as a result of the publication of popular books like The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, and The End of Faith by Sam Harris. Driven by interest in this so-called new atheism, a community of atheists and skeptics coalesced on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter.
You mean a community of so-called skeptics? Let's be real, Stevie. There wasn't all that much skepticing going on there in that community. At best, a third of the people were actually using their heads, probably more like a tenth. Another third were grifters who repeated whatever they thought would give them attention. And the third was a bunch of mindless followers who metaphorically and often literally copy-pasted pre-made arguments without the slightest clue what they were actually arguing for.
We talked about science, we argued with religious folks, and we reveled in how much smarter and more logical we thought we were. It was great. What a pack of, ironically enough, holier-than-thou assholes we were.
Steve, do you think you've stopped being holier-than-thou? Were you not just the one advocating for introspection?
Then, in June of 2017, Rebecca Watson, who created the website Skepchick and was, and still is, an awesome atheist skeptic YouTuber, posted a video in which she describes something that happened to her at a conference she had recently attended.
Holy shit, we're going all the way back to Elevator Gate. Oh my god, the nostalgia.
She was hanging out with some others from the conference in the hotel bar. It was very late, and she announced to the group, "Hey, I'm calling it a night. I'm going to bed," and left. She got on the elevator, and this guy got on the elevator with her, and the guy said, "I'd love to talk to you more. Would you come to my room for coffee?"
And she said no thanks, and he said okay, and they went their merry ways. I figured I should add that part since it seems relevant to the conversation.
And at this point in her video, Rebecca says, "Word to the wise, guys, don't do that." She goes on to explain that it makes her and many, many other women uncomfortable to be alone in an enclosed area with a man they don't know who is implicitly propositioning them.
Then don't be alone in enclosed areas that are publicly accessible. If the problem is the propositioning occurring within this enclosed context, would Miss Watson have been okay with the propositioning occurring in public, surrounded by everyone she was drinking with? Or would that have also made her feel uncomfortable? Sometimes you will be made uncomfortable by someone who has not done anything wrong. And it's not on them to change. It's on you to change if you want to stop being uncomfortable.
I'm sorry, Auntie. This is just, I can't take this level of Sofficino Findus seriously. It just creeps me out. How the hell are people like that able to walk around in public without splitting in two as soon as a pigeon looks at them funny? How can they hold up a glass with cold water without filing a lawsuit because their personal body temperature got invaded? Maybe they don't. Maybe I just don't see the lawsuits. No. Let's amp this up a notch and let's bring up a proper incident. When I was still living in Warsaw, one night I went back late after work and ended up with a compartment for myself in the train. At some point this guy came in, and he was super drunk, a broken bottle in his head, and shouted something at me. I had no idea what was going on. I had my heart jump all the way into my throat. I completely forgot to breathe for that moment. It was so scary. But then he just sat down and apologized and threw the bottle in the bin, and then he just started to cry. Just so. And he told me about his kids and how he doesn't know what to do and how he doesn't want to let them down, and it sounded like he had lost his job that day, but I don't know because he was slurring a bit too much. And so what started off with being afraid just ended up with me being really, really sad for him. And after he had shared his sorrow and cried a bunch, he then finally brightened up a bit and calmed down. He thanked me for listening, gave me a big, stinky, unsolicited hug, and when my station came, he wished me a safe trip and we just both went our ways. Now that is what I call a proper example. So how about we discuss that one?
Sometimes you will be made uncomfortable by someone who has not done anything wrong. And it's not on them to change. It's on you to change if you want to stop being uncomfortable.
Do I think the man did something wrong? No. I mean, technically yes. He wandered around intoxicated with what boils down to a weapon, and he could have badly hurt himself, me, or someone else with it by accident. But that part aside, from my personal perspective, he did absolutely nothing wrong, including the hug. And if I want to not be afraid in these kind of situations, I have to change myself. I'm aware that that is a controversial thing to say, especially in the snowflake parts of Europe and North America, but I stick to it. And here is the thing. I didn't even have to change. Because as soon as he put down that bottle and I properly understood the situation, I was no longer afraid. or even uncomfortable. And the reason I was fine in my situation, while Rebecca was not in hers, is not because of the man involved, but because of us. It's because the more you try to avoid discomfort and fear, the more sensitive you become over time, and the faster things become scary and uncomfortable to you. Whereas on the flip side, if you keep exposing yourself to mildly uncomfortable situations on a regular basis, you will over time get used to them and not find them uncomfortable anymore.
Plus, she had been invited to that conference in the first place to talk about sexism in the atheist community.
A talk about sexism at an atheist meeting? The hell? Did you have a Reiki session there too?
Which she had done earlier that day, and she made it clear to the group at the bar that she was done for the night, she was going to her room and going to bed. So, yeah, guys, don't do that. Seems like reasonable advice to me.
Right. So the conclusion should be, you and Rebecca are highly unreasonable people.
I mean, it would have been a good instance to bring up reasonable advice. It was just the wrong advice. The actual advice should have been something like this. If you see someone giving a speech about any sort of grievance that targets your group as the main problem group, then that is not a good date match, and you should avoid it. And that is a very universal rule, by the way. For example, if you're a woman and someone is giving a MGTOW speech, that is not a good date match. If you're originally from Russia and someone has a Ukraine flag hanging out the window, that is not a good date match. If your favorite hat is red and someone openly dislikes Trump, that is not a good date match. And if you're pasty white and someone... I better stop there. Either way, a bit of basic self-preservation goes a long way, especially when dating.
She doesn't accuse this guy of anything other than making her uncomfortable. She doesn't say he's a rapist or a potential rapist. She doesn't rant and rave and accuse. She just describes the situation, expresses how she felt about it and why, and guys don't do that.
And this is why you and Miss Watson are unreasonable. Because if she's not at least implying that the man was a potential threat, she literally has no reason to be uncomfortable around him. Now, she's giving her advice to guys, so the fact that the person was a man is a critical component of her discomfort, yet she has no reason to feel discomfort. This is just sexism, Steve. You know, the thing she was at this conference to comment on.
Being calm, rational people, the atheist community received this message thoughtfully in its intended spirit and took Rebecca's words into consideration during future interactions with, I'm kidding, obviously, that's not what happened at all.
There was the intended message, but there was also the inferred underlying motivation. Getting men to behave more like how she'd like them to behave. Much like what the women with the bears are doing.
Steve is also wrong. They did receive the message thoughtfully, which is why so many of them weren't happy about it. If you tell a bunch of drones, hey, don't talk to me in an elevator, they are gonna nod along and just do it. However, if you tell a bunch of actual skeptics to not talk to you in the elevator, the first thing they're gonna say is, why? What is wrong with me talking to people on the elevator? Explain yourself. Isn't it funny how the most valued essence of a particular group gets held against it as soon as it's deployed outside the pre-approved parameters?
This non-event at a hotel during an atheist conference was dubbed Elevator Gate.
If this non-event wasn't non-event enough for Rebecca to not make a video about it, why should it be non-event enough for others to not reply to it?
And it fractured the atheist community into two camps. At first, anyway. There was further splintering to come, but that's neither here nor there. The two camps were composed of people who felt what Rebecca Watson said was reasonable and inoffensive.
Yeah, people who hate men. Or people who want to not be hated by people who hate men. So, female and male feminists.
And people who felt that she had just accused every man in the atheist movement of being a violent sex criminal who couldn't be trusted alone with a woman.
Way to misrepresent the other group, Stevie. I am not a man. I did not think she implied all men are rapists, and I was against it anyways. Because I am of the opinion that policing perfectly harmless behavior to cater to your own fifis is a terrible thing to do. It's also harmful for women, because if all men stop talking to them out of fear of repercussions, then the women who enjoy positive dialogue, or perhaps are looking for a future companion, are deprived of a massive chunk of potential matches that would have otherwise been accessible to them by mere coincidence of encounter. And worse of it, it especially applies to the good guys. Because quite frankly, they're the only ones to care about acting acceptable in the first place.
Oh, wait, that's not exactly true. I'm oversimplifying. The second group also included people who felt that Rebecca Watson was complaining about nothing and deserved to be ridiculed for even sharing this story about a guy doing something that made her uncomfortable when there was so much genuine suffering going on in the world.
Way to misrepresent the other group, Stevie. Again.
And one of those people was Richard Dawkins, who wrote a brief response to Rebecca's video in the form of a message to a hypothetical Muslim woman. "Dear Muslimah," writes Dawkins, "stop whining, will you? Yes, I know you had your genitals mutilated with a razor blade and yawn. Don't tell me yet again I know you aren't allowed to drive a car and you can't leave the house without a male relative and your husband is allowed to beat you and you'll be stoned to death if you commit adultery. But stop whining, will you? Think of the suffering your poor American sisters have to put up with. Only this week I heard of one. She calls herself Skep Chick. And do you know what happened to her? A man in a hotel elevator invited her back to his room for coffee. I am not exaggerating. He really did. He invited her back to his room for coffee. Of course, she said no, and of course he didn't lay a finger on her, but even so. And you, Muslimah, think you have misogyny to complain about. For goodness sake, grow up, or at least grow a thicker skin.
Ah, the good old Dawkins humor. What a gem. By the way, I'm fairly certain that you never felt all that negative about him when he was using that strategy against Christians. You only felt negative about it when he started to direct it towards people whose message you approved of. You know, Stevie, you can tell an awful lot about someone's values based on their actions. And when observing your actions, one might conclude that you don't act on principle, but that instead you merely identified tribes and determined that certain tribes are your friends, while certain others are your enemies, and then adopted whatever virtues your tribes approved of. Of course, that kind of behavior has its benefits. You don't have to think through your own worldview all that much, and your tribe will always approve of you, as long as you stay in line, but it also has its setbacks. One of which is that if your tribe's ideology is wrong, you too will be wrong. And because of how it's set up, you would have to defend that wrong, just like the Christians have to defend their Bible.
I suppose if Dawkins composed a man or bear version of this, it would go something like, "Dear bear attack sobrevivientes, yes, I know you are horribly clawed, mangled, and partially devoured by a humongous wild animal, but think of the suffering of your poor sisters who have had to endure the unwanted, non-violent advances of men who merely wanted the pleasure of their company. You think you have something to complain about? For goodness sake, grow up, or at least grow a thicker skin, which would assuredly have been a welcome advantage during your recent mauling."
Not bad, Stevie, not bad. Though the accent needs a bit of polishing. It seems even funnier if you consider that all of these man versus bear chicks have basically tens, if not hundreds, of encounters with random men every single day. They pass men on the streets, stand next to men in the bus, get shelf-stocked by men where they shop, have meetings with men, deal with clients who are men, they get their tax checked by the security guy, they get the toilet unclogged by the plumbing guy, they get the work computer fixed by the tech guy, they get the food from the delivery guy, and the Uber driver who drives them home usually is a guy too. And in spite of all these encounters being perfectly safe to them, day after day after day, they still think bears are less dangerous.
But I digress. This withering rebuke from the Pope of atheism gave every shitty man, and to be fair, quite a few shitty women, in the movement permission to not only pile on Rebecca and flood her with harassment and abuse, but to do the same to everyone on her side, and to designate as enemies feminists and anyone who believed in principles of social justice and felt those principles should be applied to the atheist community.
You deserve to be mocked and ridiculed because you're advocates for a dangerous, society-ending ideology that cloaks itself in the word justice in order to hide its malevolence. And if you think that constitutes abuse, you'd be amazed at the kind of horrible shit people on your side advocate happen to their political enemies.
If I read the newspaper next week and the story is, oh, Richard Spencer is afraid to leave his house because every time he steps out his front door, somebody punches him, I'm going to say, good. Fuck him.
In the long run, Elevator Gate was a hugely positive thing for the atheist community.
Was it? Is the atheist movement more influential or relevant post-Elevator Gate than it was prior? Because from my perspective, the atheist movement is a shadow of what it once was. It seems like it's scarcely even talked about, let alone taken seriously.
She didn't mean to, but what Rebecca Watson did for atheists by sharing her story and saying guys don't do that is analogous to what the presidential candidacy of Donald Trump did for the whole United States 5 years later. It revealed everyone for who they really were.
You know, I grant that Trump was not bad as a means to show what your fellow humans are like, but if you really wanted to see the dark side of humanity, then you had to wait all the way for the COVID shots. Firings, banishments, segregation, imprisonments, frozen bank accounts. Quite eye-opening, actually. You know, my grandmother's family resisted the Nazis back in the days when their country was occupied by them. And so I always was a bit under the illusion that even though the average person wasn't fighting back, they would still never buy into these draconian methods, even if they wouldn't necessarily openly oppose them. Boy, was I wrong.
In atheist circles, as long as the topics were about science, creationism versus evolution, separation of church and state, that sort of thing, everyone mostly got along. But as soon as the topic became how atheists behave, or what blind spots or prejudices atheists harbor that we should examine, in other words, once the skepticism was directed inward rather than outward, a lot of ugliness that had always been there was revealed and became impossible to ignore.
Right, so when the topics of discussion were relegated to things that were at least tangentially relevant to atheism or atheist arguments, everyone got along and there was unity among the people engaging in what they identified as the community. Then feminists with ulterior motives entered into the space and fractured it by injecting in unrelated social issues. That's not the kind of thing that sounds like it would be good for a community. Now, there is a framing of events that could lead one to believe that this was ultimately good for the atheist community, at least if you have a perspective similar to Steve. While I would not say the atheist community is at all relevant or influential, feminism is. The shattered corpse of a community that was left over after the feminist subversion then became a lump of biomass that was devoured by what is the overarching feminist movement. Feminism is thriving, therefore atheism must be thriving. You're in the belly of the beast you let swallow you, and you don't see what you look like from the outside.
The negative reactions to what Rebecca Watson said in 2011 are the same as the negative reactions to women today, saying they'd rather run into a bear than a man. It's the same defensiveness, the same self-centeredness, the same fragile male ego masquerading as pride and strength, and the same refusal to hear and acknowledge and validate another person's experience in the world.
If the women are being genuine in their expression that men are more dangerous than bears, then their lived experiences are invalid. They have such a warped, inaccurate view of reality, they should be categorized as unreliable narrators. They're living in Fantasyland, and I'm encouraging them to do away with their cherished fiction. As a member of the atheist movement, might you have some understanding of where I'm coming from?
If you're a man, and most especially a cis-hetero man like myself, since we're the ones who seem the most pissed off about this.
Yes, we get it, Steve. You think women are justified in being afraid of you because you know what lurks within your soul. But you are not men. Please keep the self-hatred directed towards yourself. Now, as for why the bear thing pisses me off, I get pissed off when fools and liars get rewarded for their foolishness and lies. I think that's incredibly reasonable, especially when the foolish lies are about me and people like me.
As usual, if you're a man and you're upset by the man or bear thing, or by the suggestion that, maybe you shouldn't be trying to get women who don't know you to come to your hotel room for coffee at 4 a.m.
Dude, there was no hotel room. There was no 4 a.m. The response these women gave was utterly unrelated to any particular incident. And since you brought it up, Mr. Heterosis Male, you don't get to tell others about how they should be listening to women if you yourself don't listen to women either. Rebecca may not have appreciated the 4 a.m. invite, but I in her shoes would have appreciated them. I am right here. I'm telling you my experience. I'm a woman. Why aren't you listening to me, my dear Heterosis Stevie? Is it because my narrative is not in line with the one you're looking for? Sis. Sounds like a snake. What a whiskey head came up with that slur? It's gotta be a kink or something.
Instead of blaming women, or belittling their concerns, or vilifying feminism, or acting out your persecution complex,
I'm most certainly vilifying feminism, because feminism should be vilified, but I'm not belittling or blaming women. Go back to the original video. There are women who would choose men. So I'm aware that there are some women who live within reality. And maybe one day I'll even be lucky enough to find one, but the people I'm blaming and belittling are the hateful fools and liars. The category of hateful fools and liars does contain women, but as you've demonstrated, it also contains men.
Try this. Stop. Try to imagine yourself in another person's shoes. Try to imagine how you would feel as a typical woman alone in the woods or in an elevator with a man you'd never met before whose intentions you didn't know.
Oh, I'd only be uncomfortable if the man in the elevator with me was black. What was your immediate reaction to that, Steve? Do you find yourself having difficulty empathizing with hypothetical female me? Do you dislike the characterization that black men are more dangerous than white men, but approve of the characterization that men in general are more dangerous than bears? Why is that, Steve?
Try to imagine yourself in another person's shoes. Try to imagine how you would feel as a typical woman alone in the woods or in an elevator with a man you'd never met before whose intentions you didn't know.
Either you're implying that I'm not a typical woman, in which case I dodged a bullet, considering the way you portray them, or I am a typical woman, and I don't need to imagine because I've lived through every single one of these situations. And in that case, you're full of it because I felt absolutely fine.
Ask yourself why so many women are saying they'd rather take their chances with a bear than a man.
Because there's short-term social benefit for doing so. They might not realize that's the reason, or they might disagree with my assessment that the benefit is short-term, but that's the answer.
Most importantly, ask yourself if you've ever done or said anything that would cause a woman to prefer an encounter with a bear to an encounter with you.
In your case, Steve, yes. You have enhanced the problem by accepting a completely idiotic premise, throwing other guys under the bus in an attempt to virtue signal, and encouraging people to reduce even more the already dysfunctionally low level of human-to-human interaction.
Are you aware of how you come off to other people? Do you try not to do or say things that could come off as creepy or threatening?
You are not the right person to be providing this advice, Steve.
Do you make an effort to recognize and respect the boundaries of other people? When someone tells you that you've crossed a boundary or made them feel uncomfortable, do you receive that thoughtfully and consider that maybe you should adjust your behavior in the future? Or do you shift directly into reactionary defensive mode?
Depends on what the boundary is and where it was set. For instance, if the boundary is, do not initiate conversation with me in this public place, I am actually likely to abide by that boundary. Not because I respect the boundary at all, but because the person who has set it has identified themselves as someone I do not want to interact with. If the boundary was, don't talk online about how that person was a bitch, then I'm eagerly going to cross that boundary. If we stopped talking every time we made another party uncomfortable, everyone would be silent.
Asking these questions, performing these mental exercises is important, especially if you usually don't. The reflexive answer to the concerns represented by women's responses to Man or Bear, or Rebecca Watson's elevator story, or the Me Too movement is not all men.
That is a common response, yes. And it's not only the wrong one, it's also a really, really stupid one. Because it grants the premise that some men acted out of line, which in the case of Elevator Gate is not true and thus should not be granted.
The problem with that response is, while not all men behave in ways that discomfort, threaten, or harm women, not all men who do behave like that are doing it on purpose or with awareness.
No one knows the boundaries of other people prior to interacting with them. Every human being has a different character and a different past, which is why everyone has different boundaries, and there is no way to tell which ones they are. Which is why with every new acquaintance, you have to renegotiate and rediscover those boundaries over time. And they are not set in stone either. Because if you're a stranger to someone, you will likely hit a boundary far, far quicker than if you are a long-term friend. To demand that people know your boundaries, or to pretend like your boundaries are a standard that is universal, is not only stupid, it also makes you look like a narcissist.
A lot of the outrage from men about Man or Bear is performative, just as it was in response to Elevator Gate, just as it was in response to Me Too.
The men are being performative. So you are in fact aware that social performances are a thing, and you don't think that's what's happening when the women choose the apex predator over the kind of person conducting the interview they're currently laughing about.
A lot of it is part of the anti-feminist, anti-social justice, anti-woke grift that has been mutating and metastasizing throughout the internet for decades now.
I had scripted out the earlier sections of this video, having not gotten to this portion. I was not expecting him to take the literal inverse of my position.
Let's see. They're anti-feminist, meaning against feminism, which is a framework based on several dogmas. They're anti-social justice, meaning against social justice, which too is a framework based on dogmas. And they're anti-woke, meaning against wokeness, which in a nutshell is the application of the social justice framework onto real-life instances. In other words, you are telling me that these naughty grifter skeptics are against dogmatic frameworks? Well, who would have thought?
A lot of it is coming from men who know at some level that they are behaving in harmful ways and who resent being asked to stop.
Good thing that doesn't describe you. I bet you love it when the women tell you to stop.
Because they think changing their behavior will be too difficult, or because they just don't want to change. Because they feel entitled to act however they want, and to treat women in any way they see fit to.
I do not know this to be true, but I cannot help but get the vibe that these are the thoughts and feelings that are present within Steve that he actively needs to suppress. That his hatred towards men is reconciliatory self-flagellation.
If you're a man, but not one of those men, and you're upset by the fact that seemingly most women would rather find themselves face-to-face with a bear in the woods than with a man, perhaps you want to change that general perception that women have of men.
Yes, Steve, that's the grift. The women choose bear in order to convince men to change. They're attempting to exercise social control.
A logical first step toward that is making sure that you are not the sort of man a woman needs to worry about. Which does not mean that you should try to become more like a bear. That is the wrong lesson. You have missed the point.
What do you mean that's the wrong lesson? If women are more into bears than they're into men, then clearly those bears have something going for them. Maybe it's the fur, maybe it's the strength, or the size, or maybe women are just really, really impressed when someone is fishing by punching the fish out of the air when the fish jumps up the river. Rather than, sit in front of a stick, trying to get a thread to wiggle sexily enough for a fish to actually bite. You know what? Now that I think about it, I married a Viking who barehandedly destroys porches and grows proper face fur. You are trying to hide your soy chin behind a beard and filmed yourself in the woods while sitting on a tree. And you too are married, or at least you were married before you cheated on your wife and you took a divorce. However, Auntie, who is shaven smooth and nowhere near the woods, he is single. Ha! I got you. Clearly this is not advice you're giving there, Stevie. Clearly this is removal of competition, you cheater.
Whoa, Issa! Friendly fire! We're supposed to be on the same side. Then you come out of nowhere and call me single and baby-faced. Now for one, I do have a beard, I just keep it short. And for two, my beard was sufficient enough to have landed me multiple previous relationships. With women, no less. Now, as you might rightly infer, those relationships didn't last, though I am going to put some blame on the fact that I chose women who were similar in temperament to Miss Watson. Maybe I should grow the beard out. Is there a correlation between hairiness and quality of woman I attract?
Just for your own good as well as everyone else's, avoid forests and elevators.
New hypothetical for everyone. A woman is placed in a forest, and you get to choose whether or not a man or a bear is placed next to her. Which do you choose? See, when a woman chooses for herself to be placed next to a bear, she's outwardly expressing contempt for men. However, how many people would find it altruistic to choose bear for someone else? Choosing bear for yourself is an expression of man-hatred, but I bet choosing bear for a woman that's not you would be interpreted as an expression of woman-hatred. How many people could choose bear and honestly think they had done the woman a favor? I think it's less than the ratio expressed within the video, and that leaves me at least a little bit optimistic.
Oh, finally, he's gone. And they're going too. Do you think it worked? Are all the weird people leaving?
I hope so. I don't see any. Quick, double check the subscriber count to make sure.
It's going down. They're leaving. Perfect. Okay, quick, open the gate. Let's get the hell out of here before they decide to come back or something.